Welcome, Team Rhino. We are celebrating World Rhino Day today by talking with experts from around the world on a variety of rhino conservation topics. Joining me is Dr. Budhan Pukazhenthi, a physiologist at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute in Washington, D.C. And we are going to discuss the latest trends in research. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Chris. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit more about your background and your research at the Smithsonian's National Zoo.
Yeah, I'm a veterinarian by training. I also have my master's and PhD, which is focused on wildlife reproduction. So not very many people have that kind of a background, so I'm very lucky to be in that situation. My role at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute is as a reproductive biologist primarily. So what I tend to do is work with our collection animals to conduct research to understand their reproductive biology and use that information to improve reproductive output. So when natural breeding fails, we are called in, and with the background of the science, we are able to help that female have a baby. The perfect example, I would say, would be similar to what the giant panda did recently. And that pregnancy was achieved by artificial insemination. And I do the same for a number of other species.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about the recent birth at the zoo, and want to tell the audience that you have to tune into PandaCam and take a look at the new baby panda there at the zoo.
Yeah, I guarantee you'll spend a lot of time on it watching.
Yeah, I do already. So, how do you and your science colleagues work with the zoo?
I mean, we are primarily a conservation organization, very similar to IRF. And our research is, our research is not just limited to our own collection. We also get to travel to other zoos in the country and globally. In fact, we consult for a number of institutions as and when the need arises. So in the context of our own zoo, let me put it in two sort of parts here. One, which is the National Zoo, which is the public side of our operation where people are welcome. Please come and visit us at any time. We are free. So it's a beautiful zoo. You should come visit us. In the context of that collection, we work closely with our curators and animal managers in trying to figure out if there is any sort of a reproductive problem with their animals. For example, is my female, the animals, let's say the elephant, is my elephant cycling? And we have the science. We have developed the tools and the science to monitor the reproductive cycles and tell the manager that, yes, your animal is cycling, she is ready to breed, or we might be able to say, yes, the female was bred X number of months ago and now she is pregnant and you need to start planning for having a calf at some point in the near future. We can even predict when that calf might be born in a certain window. So we are actively engaged with our managers, back and forth communication. How can we apply all the science that we are generating to apply to the collection itself? When it comes to the collection at SCBI, I'm going to short form it for Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, which is about 70 miles from Washington, D.C. and Front Royal, Virginia. Here we are not open to public, and that actually gives us a lot more flexibility in how we manage our animals and be able to do controlled research. In science, controlling a lot of the parameters is so critical because what you find is applicable under certain conditions. So if you're constantly changing the situation, your results are not going to be reliable. So we can bring in a large group of animals and manage them very differently in a way that we even condition them by positive reinforcement to present certain behaviors that will facilitate research. And there we are working really very hard to still develop basic reproductive information about the species, and then use that information to develop what we call assisted reproduction tools, which is things like artificial insemination, embryo transfer. So it is really all science-based. So every collection depending on which institution we go to, the input or our interaction is very different, but it all leads to promoting reproductive fitness of those individual animals.
And a lot of that research that's done in places like Front Royal transfers to wild populations or assisted breeding facilities in those wild areas as well. For example, the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary in Sumatra.
Indeed, I think it's a slight distinction here is in a controlled situation like ours, maybe even in most of the zoos, it's a huge advantage to have a lot of these animals in zoos because the kind of science we can do, the knowledge we can generate is impossible in the wild situation when the animals are moving around. Having them in our care in a zoo situation, it now allows us multiple opportunities. In my own research, I can go access the collection animals at any given time, any given day, day or night, and not have to go hide out or hike a mountain or walk through a forest to find those animals. The advantage of that is now instead of just randomly collecting data points for 1 or 2 days in a month or even a week, we are able to get data points almost every hour if we want, or every day of the week we can generate it. So that's the biggest advantage of having collections in zoos because the information that we are generating based on those animals in zoos are now applicable to other situations. So when you think about in situ, in the range countries, we once again have to distinguish collections based on whether those animals are in human care, which is not a zoo, but it is what we call as a breeding center. It's the management is different versus animals that are free ranging in the wild. So the transferability of that science is sort of limited by how these animals are managed. If they're purely out in the wild, it will still impose some restrictions on how you can apply the science that you have developed in a zoo situation.
And you work with ungulates. Can you tell us what type of species fall under that category?
Ungulates refer to any animal that has hooves. So just as a basic example, I will say cows, sheep, goat, they all fall under ungulates. In the context of wildlife, I would say you can look at any of the deer species, any of the antelope species that you see in Africa, the country itself, the continent. And so we have the antelopes, we have the cervids, we have the equids, the zebras, the Schwalski horse, the Somali wild ass, and obviously rhinos, and they all fall into that too. And tapirs, once again, very few people know about tapirs. They also fall under ungulates. So that's my group of animals that I am conducting my research on these days, because that's also a group of species that not all species are considered equal. I'm going to use the rhino as an example. Most people recognize a rhino, but there are a number of other species that few people even know exist and how they even look. So it's one of a large taxonomic group that needs a lot more research to be done. And my strategy here is to try to get more and more people excited about that group so we can have more people doing research and studying them, in fact.
And why is it important to understand reproductive biology, particularly for an endangered species, which you've mentioned quite a few in that list?
Yeah, the cool thing, or the unfortunate part, let me put it that way, is even though we have several thousands of endangered species out there, if you were to go look for information about their basic reproductive biology, you will only find for a fairly handful of species that most of that information is available. What you will find is observation data. So if I was an animal manager at a zoo, and I've been working with, I'm going to use the rhinos as an example. If I've been working with rhinos, just basically based on their behavior, I would have put together some bit of information saying that, you know what, rhinos tend to breed throughout the year if you put them in a situation to pair up with a male. And it takes X number of months to have a baby on the ground, a calf on the ground. So these are fundamental reproductive biology information that has been collected more based on observation. When it comes to developing assisted reproduction, we need to get a little deeper into that system because we need to know, very similar to human, when human patients who are women who are having difficulty having a baby naturally, they go through assisted reproduction. And the science is all exactly the same, what is being applied to human and with the animals. In fact, interestingly, most of that science was translated from the animals because that is initially more advanced in animals and got transferred to the humans. So for example, in our case, if we were going to work on a particular species, I'm going to pick zebra as one of the example species here. We need to know when they are cycling. Are they seasonal breeders? Sometimes there are species which will completely shut down reproduction at a certain time of the year based on evolution of that particular species or where they come from naturally. And then for us to know, okay, how do you even find out if they're cycling, if they're reproductive? So what we have done, the Smithsonian Institution, as well as a number of zoos around the world, has developed a lot of what we call non-invasive approaches. So rather than go collect blood from an animal, if I have a reproductive problem, first thing the doctor is going to ask me to do is go stick your hand, give a blood sample. A one-time sample collection, maybe we don't complain. But if I am asked to go there every day, stick my arm out for blood collection, I am not going to go there. I'm going to find some excuses to stay out of that place. So in the animals, we have developed ways to monitor the hormones. So fecal samples are an excellent source for that information because at least a subset of hormones that are circulating in the body gets metabolized or broken down and is excreted in the feces. And we have assays developed that can detect some of these, what we call metabolites, breakdown products. Using that, we can easily determine where they are in the reproductive cycle itself. So that's one more piece. And then we have to go further. How do you collect sperm from a male safely? And what can you do with the sperm once you collect? So we call that banking, or cryopreservation of sperm. And then once we have these two pieces, we have to figure out how do you get the sperm into a female at the right window when she is receptive. So all of that information, it's consider this a puzzle piece. Every little bit of that puzzle piece has to be put together before you see that whole picture unfold in front of you. So in the context of reproductive biology, all of those pieces have to be addressed. And once you have that under control, your probability of getting a female pregnant by artificial insemination, let's say, is significantly higher than just blindly going and saying, I'm going to catch this female and artificially inseminate. The probability is close to zero. So that's why we spend a lot of time studying the reproductive biology. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of species that we do not have that bit of information, which is very critical to be successful.
And what are some of the current developments in research and how are they impacting wildlife such as rhinos?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm going to maybe approach it from multiple angles. One, in the context of reproduction, we were just talking about reproductive biology. At least in my personal opinion, I feel that techniques like artificial insemination, embryo transfer, these are little less complex in terms of the pieces that need to work together to be successful in producing an offspring. Those techniques will continue to evolve, and I truly believe that those are techniques that are still going to be practical for a number of species. Several of you might have heard about more complicated techniques like sperm injection or ICSI. Almost 80% of the patients in the human side undergo the technique where a single sperm is taken with a really fine needle and under a microscope injected into an egg. And the reason for that is the probability of getting an embryo is extremely high. You're no longer taking, it's almost close to gambling, right? You throw 1 million sperm and you hope that one is going to make it in, versus when you really have that winning card, that is a single sperm, if you can inject it into an egg, you can have an embryo produced. And that is a little bit more complicated, and it takes a lot more instrumentation to make that happen. And most recently, you must have also heard about cloning. Again, this is my personal opinion. As a science, cloning is a tool. It's still an evolving tool, and it's got a lot of issues, and the efficiency is still extremely, extremely low. But cloning will continue to evolve. There are a lot of researchers who are very interested in developing that as a tool for conserving endangered species. I would wait to see how that all plays out, because there's still a lot of questions about it. What are we trying to do with cloning? How is it going to impact the offspring that you're producing? A number of things are unknown, but these are developments. You know, in the field of science, advances always come with issues. And the beauty of science and the research is trying to figure out how do you minimize those issues and get beyond it. So it's a matter of time when more of these assisted reproductive tools are going to become more and more common and more successful and even relevant.
And you touched on assisted reproduction technology, and it's been in the news quite a bit lately, particularly with rhinos in the northern white rhino subspecies. Can you explain a little bit more of how it might impact an endangered species?
Well, with the northern white rhino, there are a couple of good things that have happened. One, I mean, the unfortunate part is, yes, this is a subspecies that is not in good shape, because you have 2 remaining females, and most of the other materials are all in frozen cell lines. But the awareness on the topic and the interest it has generated in the community has really motivated people to support rhino research. So what has happened is, in the last several years, a significant amount of resources have come in to study rhino reproduction. Yes, your end goal is to help the northern white rhino, but even to get to that point, you have to understand the biology. Back again to that basics, fundamental building blocks of the science, where you have to understand the reproductive biology of rhinos. So without those kind of funding, none of that advance would happen, right? So once we have that information, what the team is also trying to do is to use the southern white rhino as a surrogate to try and get some of these northern white rhinos back into the population. If you have continued to monitor the literature and all of the media that is coming out, it is a very complex procedure. It seems pretty easy when you draw it on a piece of paper, but every step has tons of challenges that we need to navigate. But I know the researchers who are working on, multiple teams are working on it, and I'm confident they will get over it. It's just that those things need to be addressed. But eventually, we still have to figure out, is it truly a northern white rhino, an absolutely clear northern white rhino, or is it always going to have some pieces of the southern white rhino? So it really comes down to the issue of what is the significance of managing some of these animals at that subspecies level. Can white rhinos be white rhinos, or is it absolutely required that we have to maintain northern white rhinos and southern white rhinos? So it's a hard discussion. It's a difficult conversation to have from a conservation biology perspective, from a reproductive biology perspective, and also as a researcher who is trying to prove and demonstrate that tool A, B, and C are very effective tools to recover and rescue endangered species. But there always needs to be that discussion about what are we getting out of this? What is the true implications of it? And in the context of the ecosystem services, can the northern white rhinos roles be substituted by southern white rhinos? Do we know that? All of those need to be addressed. But so again, science is fascinating. That's the coolest part. That's what excites me. And that's why I'm in this field, working with endangered species and science. It's really, really cool. But then we, as scientists, we also have to sort of constantly think about all the actions, everything that we do, what are the consequences, and how meaningful is it in the context of saving a species and restoring a species to its natural habitat or maintaining healthy populations.
What resources are needed to continue this work and produce additional research advancements, be it with assisted reproduction technology or what comes next?
Yeah, when it comes to research on endangered species, I would say first and foremost is having access to the animals. Without access to those animals, none of us are going to be successful, and none of us are going to even be able to do the research that we aspire to do. So frankly, zoos and breeding centers that exist around the world are extremely, extremely critical to make that happen. So that, I would say, is the highest priority, getting access to the animals itself. Two, I would say it really comes down to resources in the context of money resources, because as we already seen, even in human research, human disease research or health research, our government invests billions and billions of dollars in improving that. Unfortunately, when it comes to conservation, even though people all are excited about seeing species in the wild and being part of that effort to save the species, it really comes down to resources in the context of money that will then allow the organization, be it a zoo or a nonprofit entity, including IRF, where we are able to invest those dollars in recruiting people, recruiting scientists, training people to make that conservation happen. So that's another big piece of this puzzle, because you need the animals, you need the dollars. And then the third piece is more people being excited about it. I always look at myself in the mirror and say, you know what, at one time I dreamt about a career in conservation, helping endangered species through reproduction. And I was very fortunate to get that opportunity to train at the National Zoo, under some of the best researchers that exist. And now I'm able to do that work. And my job now is to allow a lot more people in the years to come to follow similar dreams, because we are not going to be here forever. And the next generation that is following us, they are wired differently. They are very, very creative. They're very smart, scarily smart for me. But we are hoping that they will be the next group of people who are going to come up with innovative ways of helping these species. So those are things that, I would say are very important, and in making sure that the resources, all of these resources exist for conservation to happen, and we need it.
That's, I think, a very good transition to the Smithsonian's National Zoo is really making an effort to engage the future scientists and conservationists, and they introduced Zoo Guardians. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Yeah, it is cool. And it's in fact timely, right? Because given the pandemic situation, a lot of the kids are not able to go back to the school. And it sort of takes away that interactive experience. Or even now, very few people are able to go back to the zoo because of COVID and other challenges. This particular platform, it's a game. It's an online platform that the zoo has developed with other software developers. And the idea behind this is where the virtual game where you can role play. You can either be a keeper, you can be a veterinarian taking care of it, or if you want to think big, you can be the next director wanting to build the next big zoo and the most exciting zoo that you want to build to get people engaged in. So it's a very interactive program or application or a game that is out there. But it's not just about bringing animals to a zoo or how you manage the animals. It also gives a nice window into what are the challenges that these wildlife are experiencing in the wild. So it does touch upon loss of habitat. It talks about poaching pressure that happens. Rhinos, classic example. you're still losing thousands of animals every year. So all of that is fit into that game so that anyone who's playing, especially kids who are even least bit interested in conservation, when they go through the process, I think it'll make them think about it a little bit more, hopefully get them excited, and hopefully one day they will be knocking on the door of some animal keeper or a curator or a scientist at the National Zoo or any other zoo, your local zoo, to say, you know what, I really want to come and work for the zoo. I feel I can help and I can give my resources there in terms of my knowledge resource. So with that, we are hoping that people will engage in their local zoos. Again, this game is available globally. Anybody can download and play. So it is not just focusing on the National Zoo. Yes, we are a significant component of it, but I would really, really push hard on people in their own communities. Support your local zoos, engage in the conservation programs that they're involved in, and help them to be successful, because we have to save this. We have to save this planet, and we all have a role to play here.
I was going to ask you how people can get involved, and right there it was. So thank you for that answer. If I asked you to look into the future, what changes do you want to see to help rhinos or other wildlife, and what positives or advancements do you see are possible?
Well, for me, it's going to be a mix, because one, what we say are the technologies that are working now, I think we'll continue to use quite a bit of that even in the future for years to come, because, you know, as these advances, say, some of the newer techniques that are coming out, as those technologies advance, what has been around for the last 15, 20 years are also going to continue to advance. So I think the success rates of some of the basic assisted reproductive tools like artificial insemination will definitely improve for different species, especially for when it comes to rhinos. The researchers who are working in that particular field have done amazing bit of work that the success rate is much higher compared to a number of other species. In terms of other techniques, either from just purely in the assisted reproduction itself, we talked about cloning. There are a lot of in vitro systems that we are including National Zoos focused on, where we are trying to grow eggs, what we call oocytes, or eggs from the ovaries. When an animal dies, for example, for health reasons, when a very valuable animal dies, we want to be in a position to recover as much of the genetic material so that we can still propagate that particular individual genetics. So we are trying to develop methods to harvest the eggs from the ovaries, grow them completely in a dish to a mature state so we can produce an embryo. We're trying to grow the ovarian tissue in a dish. So it is not a single egg we are focusing now. Each piece of ovarian tissue can have hundreds of eggs that can be developed in vitro. Same way with the males. We're trying to come up with techniques that will allow us to recover genetic material from young animals when they're not yet sexually mature. So all of those techniques are going to evolve. And last, I will still touch upon cloning, because that is, again, it's in the forefront now. So I feel that will be another technique that will evolve and get improved, and most likely more and more things will come up. And last bit, I will say the world of genomics. I think I do want to mention that, because several of us are going there, giving our samples to look at what our genetic composition is. And we at the National Zoo and a number of other institutions, we are actually developing genomic tools, very similar to the 23andMe kind of platform, where we can send a sample off to sequencing and try to understand more about the subspecies level. Are there any health issues? How do we better genetically manage these animals based on genomic information? So we are hoping down the road there will be a way a keeper or a curator can just take a swab from an animal, ship it off in an envelope, and get some data on your animals in the near future.
That's very interesting developments to look forward to. And I think, Nina Facioni, our IRF's executive director, says we have to use every tool in the toolbox. And so
absolutely,
several research tools in that toolbox. So we're excited to see those developments. Any last thoughts?
Well, Conservation is a long-term effort. It's not one success, even when in our own perspective. Let's say with assisted breeding, when we have a successful birth, yes, we all get excited because there are multiple years of work that's gone behind that single offspring that was being produced. But that is not the way we would hang the cap and say we are done. It is just the beginning. And it is a really long-term commitment, both from a research perspective, from institutional support perspective, from various NGOs that are working out there, and the foot soldiers out there in the field who are trying to protect these animals from poaching and all those. It has to go on for a long time. So everyone, I will encourage everyone listening to this to join us in this effort, because we all, as together, we can be successful. So enjoy nature, be part of it, do your part, and let's make the world a better place.
Excellent way to leave us. Thank you for joining me today and for your support for rhinos and other wildlife. Hey, Team Rhino, here are some actions you can take on World Rhino Day and every day. Stay informed, spread the word, wear the shirt. We always appreciate your donations, and you can start your own fundraiser as well. Find out more at rhinos.org /world-rhino-day. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of our Rhino Talks on World Rhino Day.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.